Welcome to the Future of Space podcast. I'm your guest host for today, Alice Carruth. Now, I'm not going to introduce our guest because I think that would be kind of defeating the purpose of the fact that I'm the guest host. Today is the 100th episode of the Future of Space podcast, and I feel like it's just the perfect timing to turn the microphone around on your normal host, Daniel Fox. Daniel, would you like to introduce yourself to your audience?
Well, I think that by now, I hope the audience has a little idea of who I am. Thank you, Alice, for being the honor of being the guest host today. I'm Daniel Fox, usually the host of podcast The Future of Space, but also co-founder of the company. Over 15 years, I did solo wilderness expeditions, which culminated with the publication of my book, Feel the Wild. And we had a big book tour that was sponsored by Arc'teryx and Lexus. And over COVID, I had a aha moment and connected with space and really saw the continuation of the story that I've been telling, which was the human story. But before that, I've used nature, and now I see space as a continuation of nature and really our mission, the medium, the kind of the carrier of life, taking it beyond Earth. And so we created a company, and where it wants to kind of bridge the gap between these different communities that don't talk to each other usually, and we want to connect everyone together, bring them to the table.
So we're going to dissect all of that because I want to know the full lowdown of exactly how you got to where you are. But before we get into all of that, I know you always start with 3 words that capture the essence of space. And you must have thought about this with 99 episodes already done. What are your 3 words, Daniel?
I've thought about it really thoroughly. I had some few words that I was playing around, but I went off script and I really searched for the words that encapsulated the spectrum of what space really is. And the first word is life. I think that there wouldn't be any reason why the universe would be different than what we have on the planet. The planet is a microcosm of what we can find out there, in the same way that a molecule in my body is just a microcosm of my entire ecosystem, right? So if there's life here, the universe is alive, we will find life in different places. And I have this quote that I really love. In fact, we put it on the website from a corny space movie, not too known, but for me, it really kind of embodies the spirit. And the quote is from the Brian De Palma movie, Mission to Mars. The universe is not chaos, it's connection. Life reaches out for life. That's what we're born for, isn't it? To stand on your world and look beyond and to the next one. It's who we are. So as ambassador for life, the universe is full of life. Earth is life. So that's my first word. The second word is incentive. And I want to explain a little bit more about incentive. It's what New Horizons and New Frontiers do for us. It's a call. It's a call to reach. It's a call to innovate. It's a call to push the boundaries. It's a call to be creative and figure out how to get to these places. Right? The ocean was that for quite some time. Over the mountain was that, and now it's space. And once we get to space, it will be something else. But it's always that call that makes us, that assures that we don't just settle on where we are. We're always looking to go beyond the horizon. So for me, space is life, incentive. The third one, and I think one of the most important ones, is stories. There are millions and millions and millions of stories that are waiting to be written as we continue the journey of the human species, that we go to space. And I'm kind of looking forward where we're going to be 10, 15, 20 billion people that are scattered beyond the planet and each have different stories that contribute in moving forward. So life, incentive, and stories.
3 great words. And I feel like we're going to really start with the last one, your story, which I think is so important. And I love the fact that you really gave a lot of thought into that. You and I, we're storytellers. And we definitely have that combined fascination about people and places and things that tell a story that really make us human. But to really understand your story, I want to go back to the beginning. Tell us a bit about where you grew up, what kind of influences there were in your life, and really at what point in your life did you start to think, this is what I want to be when I grow up? Now, I know we're all starting to change that, and like you say, you're newer to space, but I really think understanding your pivotal moments in your early childhood really help people understand who you are and where you're going.
As a little Daniel Fox, roaming the forests, looking at the world. Now, I moved a lot when I was a kid. My parents moved a lot. It was not the story of being an army brat, but for work reason, by the age of 12, I had moved already 10 times. So I had to develop the capacity to reinvent my world pretty rapidly. But there was one constant in all these movings, and it was nature. Local park, local forest, a beach. And nature became this refuge where I would go back and find a certain sense of normalcy. And it really taught me as a young individual the values and these principles of life, the sense of connectedness, and how conflict and imperfection is part of this ecosystem, right? We tend to think that life is static when in reality it's super dynamic, and all these organisms are connected, but they're always playing this dance against one another. So nature from an early age was my teacher, was a mentor. And I grew up with a really entrepreneurial spirit. First time I applied to university was in marine biology. I wanted to sail the world and study whales. But I also realized that I didn't have really the scientist mindset or the educational dedication to become one. But I could figure out how things work. And I had this appetite for curiosity, for learning, for doing things. So I figured that my path was more into marketing, business. And I remember making a conscious decision of putting my dreams aside and deciding to go make money, and then I'll circle back with financially the proper means and buy a boat and sail the world. But I remember deeply how in that moment it was almost a betrayal to who I was. And for years after, I always said that this is the moment that I give up. So going into the marketing, going into the business, and being good at it, but never being fulfilled. Later, in my late 20s, early 30s, I found myself in a place where I had to reassess everything, how I wanted my next 15 years to be. And I remember that in that moment, I would choose living in a shack by the ocean rather than continuing what I was doing. So that's what I did. I sold everything. I was living in New York City, came up with a sponsorship proposal and reached out to companies, and they allowed me to go to South America, to Argentina. And this is where I started again. I was early 31, 32, and I went down to Argentina and I camped for 6 months at Valdez Peninsula. And this is where I started to write. I started to write and I started to photograph. And I started to find my niche, my signature. The stories that I was writing were not necessarily about nature, but they were about us, looking at nature for some inspiration, try to understand the values and the principles and how it works so that we can understand who we are as a species. And one of the things that for me has always been in the back of my mind and the foundation of the work that I do is I'm also in love with the human story. I don't agree with the current narrative that we're bad, that we're awful. I think actually that we're incredibly surprising. We come together in the worst of times. And I don't know if you remember, there's a scene in the movie when Earth stood still with Keanu Reeves, and he has this meeting with one of his compatriots who was a scout and came, and now he has a chance to leave the Earth and be saved while Earth will be destroyed. And he goes, no, I'm standing here. There's something special about who they are. And I truly believe that. And I've always felt that the story that we have about ourselves is not good. So through all the stories that I've written, there's always this essence of we're doing good. We're making mistakes. Obviously, life is messy. Because the reality is that the difference between a mistake and a solution is only in the hindsight. It's looking back and being able to say, well, that sucked. But in the process, we're all trying to figure out our way forward, always navigating in uncharted waters. And life doesn't want perfection because there's nowhere to go. there's a system of conflict and disruptions and creation destructions that is in place for one purpose only, for evolution, for things to not be settled, for things to move forward, to adapt. The line between the origin of life on Earth and where we are today, that was not like, let's have a billion-year plan and it's going to be step by step. It's constant disruptions and mistakes, and life throws billions of things on the wall to see what works and what doesn't work, and it goes from there. This is why the scale of the universe and the timeline is so huge. It's because it's just a randomness of things. Hopefully, will produce something. And for the miracle of life, here we are today, a result of all these unexpected accidents. Had it not been for the random rock falling from the sky, dinosaurs most likely would still be roaming because they had done so for 100 millions of years. So what we are as a species is we're extremely resourceful at moving and trying to learn from our mistakes. But for the same reason that it says on a pack of cigarettes it will kill you and people still smoke, there's a fine line between being stubborn and being creative. It works for some, it doesn't work in some other times. And it's hard enough to change for one person. Imagine how hard it is for 1 billion people, for a family, for 8 billion to change. But ultimately, if you really step back and if you're able to quiet the noise, even right now, you will see the gradual line that goes up and things get better. And as much as we want to romanticize the past, that oh my God, things were better, I think really deep down, no one in their right mind would want to go back and live the way things were 50 years ago, 75 years ago, 100 years ago, because you can't go back and say, I want all the benefits that we have today, but the simplicity of things were back then. It's a package, health-wise, food-wise, opportunity-wise. The world is getting better and we're learning. And we're talking about space now with a narrative and questions that no one asked back in the 1500s where people were leaving Europe to North America. They were just like, we're just going to go and conquer, and then that's it. Now we have conversations, broad spectrum, just wanted to make sure we do things correctly. So for me, to go back to my story, Feel the Wild was that. How can I tell a story about us? And bringing nature and reminding people that we are a good species and we're making the best, and nature is not perfect. And let's try not to romantically think that this paradise. And actually, we bring something better to nature. We bring morality. There's no moral in nature. Nature doesn't care. After my book tour, there was a sense of like, okay, what's my next chapter? And COVID happened. And I remember the day. It was my Apollo moment. 2 rockets, SpaceX landing upright. And I remember looking at it and said, space is not just a night sky. This is where we're going. Because I've never been like a space person. I've never been a Star Trek geek. I was never a space geek. I've always appreciated what it was, but never thought this is where we're going. But in that moment, I really understood that technology was taking us. And I saw the continuity. I saw life going and reaching out. And I saw us being at the center of it. Not that we're gods of the world. We're insignificant in the big scheme of things. But we are the carrier of that torch. We're the first species that we know of that is about to take life beyond. We're about to give it other options. And we're about to continue that life, that story of connecting. And then so Future Space was formed, and here we are.
You kind of stole a few of my questions in there, which was really good. But, you know, I, like you, didn't grow up really interested in space. Not that it was not interesting, it just wasn't my first interest. It wasn't my first love, and came to it in my 30s. So kind of in a similar sort of time frame as you did. But I'd love you to take us back to that moment when you were traveling and you were in the wilderness and you were alone. Was there an aha moment, an absolute, okay, this is when I realized, this is when it clicked? Or was it more gradual over time that you started to see how you wanted to move things forward?
It was not a aha moment that I can remember of. I just remember this sense that nature for me has always been this place that made sense. I've always, I think, been more uncomfortable in the human world because it's a lot more complex in our species. What we say is not always what we mean. If you don't play the game, it's hard to figure out exactly where I place. And I think it's always been hard for people to understand where to place me. I think I have interests that go in so many different places. And I never felt that I belonged to one tribe over the other. I kind of felt that I was this bizarre person where I could be totally at home in the middle of nowhere, just by myself in front of grizzlies. And then the next day, being at a 5-star hotel at a gala and see the value in both and being as comfortable in both. But what I always remember is, for me, nature was the simplicity of life. It's messy. It's meant to be messy. There's no wrong. There's no good. There's either advantages or disadvantages, depending on where you sit at it in that equation. A tree that is dead is not good or bad. It benefits some and it doesn't benefit others. So every time I found that I was in the city for too long, I would go back into the wilderness and be reminded of, well, I can put a roof over my head. I can go and fetch the meal for today. Your gratification is immediate because either you survive or you don't survive. So it was always something that I saw that was bigger than us. And it's still bigger than us. Every time that we think that we have it figured out, it's bigger than us because it's not meant to be perfect. It's meant to constantly leave us on the edge. And whenever we think that we have it figured out, then the system breaks. I mean, it's chaos, right? It's chaos. So it's always been that place where I knew I could go and resource myself. But on every expedition that I've done, there was always this aha moment where I knew that I had been given something. For me, my expeditions, nature has been my studio. It's where I go to create. You need that solitude. You need that place of vulnerability so that you can connect. You can see something bigger. And on every expedition, there would be this moment where I would see things differently. I would notice all the shadows connecting together and understanding that place of connection where everyone is basically brought into this darkness only happens when we step away from the lights into the shadow of the earth. And this is where also we get to connect with the stars, because if we lived in a world of light, we would just have a blue sky all the time and never knowing what's beyond. So these moments were extremely vivid for me. And in that moment, I was no more interested to be in the wilderness or be there. All I wanted to do was to come back and craft a story and share it. So these aha moments happen on my expeditions when I'm by myself and where I feel like I've been given something.
You talk a lot about being alone, isolation, extreme environments. And I wonder how much that is very reflective of what astronauts do. It's a lot to deal with the analog astronaut experience, which often forms the basis of off-Earth experiences. And I wonder how much of it you're starting to sort of see things in the way that space does. And maybe that's how you guys kind of converged, how you found space and how space found you, in that you understand isolationism, you understand extreme environments, you understand the connectivity that people have with the Earth as a planet. And I the way you're telling your story and the way you've told your story in the past, it really very much reflects that analog astronaut experience. Have you ever been able to sort of compare and contrast exactly how people are doing those missions versus what you've done over the years?
So there's a big difference between being alone and solitude. And you can be alone, surrounded by people, and never feel alone in solitude. I've lived in New York, for 7 years, and I know it can be extremely common for people to feel extremely alone, surrounded by millions of people in New York, if you're not connected. And then you can be in the middle of nowhere and feel connected with everything around and never feel alone. And I think that what solitude offers you is a capacity to create a space for reflection. You're forced to deal with your thoughts, but also to look around you and let the world come to you. Because usually in our everyday life, we're moving forward. We're the one imposing ourselves into the world. So our sight, our senses are taken in. But in a place of solitude, suddenly you reverse the dynamic, and now it's the world coming to you. I often share it with people that, when I give presentations, I take, for instance, the room that I'm in. I say that, like, right now, you guys are listening to me and I'm talking to you, but the dynamic is between you and I. And the background, the room, the building is just kind of a backdrop. When you leave, you will remember bits and pieces of what I said, but whatever is on the wall, whatever is happening in that building, no memory of it. But if you get to spend one night, 10 days, 2 weeks in that room, in that building, just by yourself, now the dynamic happens between you and that place, and you start to notice cracks on the wall, you start to hear things, and you start to realize that that place is alive. Not that like it has a spirit, but it has a character, it has things. And that is what happens in nature. You can go to these places all your life, but never be in a situation where you get nature to come to you. When astronauts are on the ISS, and I think that's one of the reasons there's a place for the overview effect, is because there's a place where they have to take in what they're experiencing, what they're seeing, and they got to reflect, they got to really process that perspective and understand the bigger picture that it's harder to have when you're constantly having to worry about paying bills and going to get the groceries, dealing with the kids. It's hard. Everyday life is hard. The place of artists, it has a specific purpose. Artists are to be on the edges of society because we're there to remind others of these deep thoughts. Because even when I find myself bogged down into making sure that the business is running and the bills are paid and the team has their things, it's really hard to see the bigger picture. But solitude really creates that place for introspection that is so essential, I think, for a healthy life.
So you kind of alluded to it a little bit earlier, and you certainly touched on it then about the overview and space and how much you've sort of immersed yourself into this industry in the last few years. And you and I actually met at a space tourism conference, and we're very much immersed in that field and that thought process. Tell me what you have discovered about yourself and others having been involved in the space industry in the last few years, and what you think is going to happen over the next immediate few years' time.
For people to know me, some of it has been quite a big surprise. I recently wrote a piece called Give My Body to AI, and it's a really surprising turnaround of my position towards technology and space and our place in it. Because before realizing that we are going to space, I was really with the understanding that we're limited to this planet and we will have to humble ourselves into the limitations that we have, and we will have to scale down. We will have to put the brakes and understand that it's finite and things are going to be complicated. And I had this romantic idea of I wanted all my molecules to go back to nature, and I want to have a giant anchor at my feet and be dropped in the middle of the ocean, and having my wife trying to figure this out. But I really had this romanticism for how I thought nature was and knew we were. And with my discovery of going to space, I saw that nature, its place. Nature is amazing, but at the same time, we don't want to leave our fate in the ends of nature. In fact, our success has been to go beyond what nature has given us. Nature has not given us clothes, it has not given us a roof over our heads, it has not given us food or anything. We're just born into this world naked, and then after that we have to figure it out. And the reason why we exist today is because we've been able to take the randomness and the unfairness of nature and create a certain stability above that. And what makes us really strong is our capacity to move information through times and being able to keep building on it. So I wrote Give My Body to AI as this reflection of understanding that we have a certain agency and a responsibility to figure out how to move forward in a sustainable way and help in any way that we can Even if it's giving life to one person, that person might tip the scale. And now I believe that we have to do more, but better. Because more always invites us to find solution, but we have to do it better. So getting into space really opened up my mind into how we're going to be moving forward. And it's a community that is always looking to push. This is, for me, there was a conflict that I've always had with the environmental movement. The environmental movement was always looking into the past as if there was a magical place to go. And how can we do less? How can we go back? How can we stop? And understanding the human nature, or nature in general, you can't stop. You can't tell life not to grow. If you don't want people to grow, then you have to give them a way to grow that is more sustainable. You cannot just say, you can't do this. You can't do that. You have to go back. You have to stop. No, you have to say, this doesn't work right now. How can it work better? How can we move forward with a framework of growth that is more equitable, that is more sustainable? But you have to figure out how to move forward. And I think that space is offering, well, the community of space is struggling how to communicate that story. They're really focused on, well, we have satellites, the science, the astronomy, but for the rest of the people, they struggle in connecting the dots. Why should it be important for me? Why should I care? There's also one thing that is extremely important to address, and that people in the space community struggle also, is the sense of abandonment that many have, for the same reason that Europe in the 1500s, a lot of people didn't like the fact that there were others who left. For the same reason that when you have a sibling in the family that leaves the village and goes to New York or to San Francisco or to the big city, the ones behind always feel like, well, so we're not enough for you. You have to go for something bigger. That narrative is nothing new, and it needs to be addressed so that we can do something about it. We can tell people that one is not at the expense of the other, and everybody's working towards the same goal, to the same direction, but everybody's going at it from a different perspective. So for me, space is really this embodiment of the continuation of the human species. And I feel that we're just about to open the door to a future of a human experience that it's really hard for us to understand how different, drastically different it's going to be. Before my transition to space, I felt that living 100 years on this planet was plenty. I thought that by 100 years old, throw yourself a big party and then take a cocktail and have fun. But now if someone offered me to live 500 years, even if it meant to be a homeless, I would take it without hesitation, because I just want to see. It's a huge leap that is needed to do what we're about to do. But once that leap is done, then the playing field will be dramatically different. In the same way that when life on Earth, when it was single-cell organisms, it was growing, but the pace was just kind of slow. When it jumped from single-cell to multi-cells, life exploded. Because now it was the tools that you had just allowed you to do so much more. Now we're about to go from single planet to multi-planet, and the tools that are needed to just make that leap will just basically create an entire new era of what it means to be human and what it means to explore.
You touched on a ton of things there. One of the things I really wanted to point out was that space and Earth nature are very much the same thing. Space is nature, and I think that's really where you're getting that transition going in from one to the other. And you're absolutely right. I've had lots of people across the world say, do you know about climate change? And I have to laugh and say, yes, I know a lot about it because of space. Space technology is doing a lot for the Earth, off the Earth, and we need to really get that connection and that storytelling back in together so that people understand. We use satellites on an average 22 times a day and don't even realize it, whether it's from your weather app on your phone or through connections on the internet. Sometimes it can be from your television screen. It can be when you're paying a financial transaction through a satellite. You just don't realize how much it plays a pivotal role. And it's a difficult one, isn't it? Because you and I are both communicators. We're both part of this education of people who aren't in the space bubble to be able to explain it to them why it's important to them. And I guess that goes back to your really great question of what is the human story of going to space? You've kind of touched on it, but really, what is the one we need to be pushing across to people that don't understand what space is?
It's the continuation of life. it's the new horizon now, but it is that story of moving beyond. People say that human nature and exploration, it's our nature to explore. Nature is always expanding, try to reach. And if you put a fungi in one place, it will try to go everywhere until it can. What we've done, I think, as humans is we've created a story around that drive of life. And now, we create stories around going to these new places. But we are the embodiment of life, combined with our capacity to innovate, to find solution, not to leave it to the randomness of trials and errors, to really be dedicated into a goal. We go to places that no one has gone before. We do things that no one has done before. And now we're about to go beyond. So for me, the human story of space is the human story. It's life. It's taking it to new places. And it's evolution. And it would be such a waste for life to invest billions of years to remain on a tiny speck in a giant universe. Right? If you're going to grow in complexity for billions of years, it's because you want to continue, you want to connect, you want to figure out a way. Again, I say you, I'm not saying that life has an entity sitting, on a chair as a master plan, but that force developing in complexity and evolution, trials and errors, to ultimately die on the planet when the sun explodes. What a waste. Right? If you can't continue, life figures out a way to branch out, and now suddenly you have life spreading in the universe. That is, I guess, the biggest gift that we can do to life. And these new horizons always offer an opportunity to do things better. America. What was really America beyond the mistakes done? There are always mistakes. When the kids leave the nest, they make their own mistakes. They always want to do better, but they will make their own mistakes. But what was America? Go to the National Archives in Washington and really understand what it was. It was a vision of being better than what Europe was. Resources were depleted. Society was on the brink of collapse. It was so miserable in Europe that people were willing to get onto a ship and cross an ocean in miserable conditions, only for the hope of starting something better. And the construction of North America elevated the entire world. This is a reason why the US is what it is today. It became a beacon of hope, of opportunity. But that's what these new horizons always offer. They offer a chance to do something better in you. Space is that next destination. It's where our kids will go. That's where we look towards to start from a scrap, right? Because the infrastructure is not there. Like if you look at the train in the US, one of the reasons why it's so hard to build trains is because there are people everywhere. But at the beginning, trains were super easy because it was an open land for everyone compared to Europe. So space is not just important for climate change because of technology, but it is always part of the solution. Where these places where we go are always part of the solution, in the same way that when Tesla, Edison, and the Wright brothers were trying to power the world and take over the sky in the 1900s, when people were dying in the streets for diseases that were totally unrelated to electricity in the sky, the world that it created took care of a lot of problems that we had. So that is the human story of space.
I love that. The space has got this misconception attached to it from people that don't work in the industry, that it's difficult to penetrate unless you are a scientist, somebody who specializes in technology, an engineer, mathematician. You and I were artists. Have you come across any challenges of being able to penetrate the space industry and get your voice heard by the people that you want to? And how have you overcome those challenges?
Of course it is, because it's a young industry. If you look at the iPhone, at the beginning, there was just all computers. There were things that the industry was just filled with people who connected to that technology. Now it's just a tool that connects everyone, that is used by filmmakers, by bankers, by everyone. Space is really young, and we're starting to understand the necessity or how the human experience needs to be connected. For the same reason that astronauts back in the 70s or even just recently. I mean, we're talking right now, we got civilians that are about to step out on Polaris Down. Astronauts, up to very recently, were asked to be kind of robot-like people who can follow orders, they're engineers, they can deal with stress. It's not about the human experience. It's really hardcore wilderness camp, boot camp, and where you're thrown into the middle of bears everywhere, and then you have to remain calm. Now we understand that if people are going to go to space, we need to bring the human experience. We need to bring food that is pleasant. We need to figure out the clothes. We need to figure out everything that makes the human experience now has to be moved and elevated and adapted. So the engineers will start to become more on the back end of that framework, and the human experience now will start coming. It's not something that it's happening overnight, because obviously the back end is still being built. The infrastructure needs to be built. But I love companies like Axioms and Space Perspective, and even, what we do at Future Space, where we're not trying to reach out to the space community. We're trying to reach the human experience community. You have Axiom that is talking with Prada, that is talking to Mom Champagne, that is talking to companies that are so unrelated to space. You have Space Perspective now. They have a relationship with Mercedes. They had this contest with the cookie or Oreo. So going beyond, bringing the non-space community to the space community, that is, I think, the goal that you and I and these companies must really focus on, because the engineers are focused on their world and they have their place to say. But for the same reason that the environmentalists never succeeded in telling the story of nature to a public that doesn't really care about an increase of 1 or 2 degrees Celsius, because they look at their temperature outside and are like, well, that's my day yesterday. So storytelling is not meant to be told by engineers or environmentalists. They're meant to be told by people who understand where the gap is. In the same way that Jeff Bezos' job is not to tell a story. Jeff Bezos' job is to create opportunity for others to tell stories. Billionaires have a specific and much needed place in that equation. And I think that we have to give them a break and understand where they fit, because they always existed and they'll always be part of the equation.
And they're driving innovation, which is so important in this industry. I don't think we value it quite as much as we should do. They really are the ones that are pushing us forward in the US, particularly at the moment, but certainly around the world, we're seeing that come about. What has been the most surprising thing for you being part of this industry, and what is it you kind of want to let others from outside of the space industry know that brings them into this whole story?
They're looking forward, and they're inspired, and they're committed. They are so motivated at finding solution. And I think it's a common thread I keep hearing from people that are in the industry, how refreshing it is, because there's such a doom and gloom, whether from the environmental aspect, climate change, politics. We're so quick at really pointing the finger at each other or highlighting what we do wrong, and we forget what we do right. And so for me, I have this motto of looking forward with perspective and acquired knowledge, rather than pointing the finger backward and trying to find who to blame. I don't blame the past. I refuse to blame the past or our parents or anything that we think that was awful, because I don't simply believe that people in the past decide to do things to screw things up purposely. You do things with the best of intentions, understanding that you have to make mistakes. You don't know. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it doesn't work. And then you hope for the best. And then sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And it works. Maybe sometimes it works today, but it's not going to work tomorrow. Plastic was supposed to save the world, and now it's a problem. If we want to judge the past the way that we judge the past right now, then we have to accept that we will be judged by the future in the same manner. And I'm not too sure that people today would say, well, I did things for bad reasons. They will say, I did everything that I could with the knowledge and with the capacity that I had. But I guess, world is a little bit more complicated. So for me, the space community is really a community that is motivated at moving the pieces forward and trying to find solutions. And for them, it's never about can't or can. It's about how can we make it work? How can we figure out the solution? How can we connect the dots? So that is what's refreshing about the industry.
Absolutely. They're great problem solvers. And as we're talking about forward thinking, future thinking, it gets me thinking about the future of space. What is it you are looking to do, and what is it you've got coming up in the immediate future as well?
We want to be that big platform that shapes the narrative of how we move as a society forward. I'm not going to lie to you. I want to be the next TED. I want to be the next Davos. TED was incredible for 20 something plus years. It really brought a way of looking at the world and how to find solutions, but they've been around for 25 years. And I think there's a room for something else. Our company is called Future Space, but it could be Future of New Horizon, Future of our Species. It's really how can we embrace these new frontiers, whether it's space, whether it's AI, whether it's technology, whether it's where we're going. How can we embrace these new frontiers while elevating the human experience, celebrating the human experience and elevating the conversation? We want to bring people to the table that usually don't bring people together so that we can celebrate who we are and we can have amazing conversation and we can move the needle forward. And we do that by big events and smaller events. One of the big ones is Space to Sea, which is coming up in December. We have William Shatner, Neil deGrasse Tyson, Scott Kelly. We have Jose Hernandez, also the astronaut. We have Céline Cousteau. We have Ann Curry. People that would never come together. I mean, I had Neil deGrasse Tyson saying to me, it's like, I have to give it to you. You brought people to the table that just don't. And people that are coming on that voyage, it's not cheap, but people that are coming are not the people who go on a cruise to Antarctica. There are people who this is a once in a lifetime. They want to be there. On the Friday the 20th, understanding how exclusive this voyage is, we will be broadcasting with Janet's Planet live from the ship to 80,000 plus students around the world with Tyson, Shatner, Kelly, and Hernandez. So this is one big theme that we're going to be doing, but then the rest we're going to have land events. And we want to find ourselves in places where usually you don't have space. So we want to piggyback on Fashion Week in New York or in Europe, during Art Basel in Miami, during whatever gathering that is not space related. We want to be there so that we can bring the conversation, and we want to make sure that the audience is 50% space and 50% non-space, so the conversation can actually be elevated, and people can see that ultimately we're all trying to do the same thing. No one is against each other. If we can succeed in bridging that gap, then for me, this is what Future Space is made for.
What an exciting adventure you're going on, and I cannot wait to see not just the images, but hear the stories of people who are telling and see the impact of that education, because I love the fact you're bringing that in, and it's such an important part to inspire the next generation of what could happen and what they could be part of. So this feels like a really good time to bring in your 3 words of wisdom that you would like to give to your audience.
I thought about this one carefully. So the first one is resiliency. We are resilient. This is what we do. Life is resilient. The Hollywood future of death everywhere, where everything has disappeared, that's not reality. The reality is that life is always figuring out, even in the worst of places. Go on a lava field and see how plants are coming out of nothingness. And what we do is we find our way forward. This is where we are. We are resilient. We're in the embodiment of resiliency. The other one is agency. We have agency. We're not a static species. We don't let the world go by. Again, a Hollywood movie where you have a dictator and then you have the entire world that is powerless. That's not who we are. Even in politics right now, these agents of disruption shake things up and reassess what is important. So agency is the biggest power that we have, and we forget about it. We're given circumstances, and then we have the capacity to transform the story. Right? We have to reshape. We're the only species that is able to take something dramatic, tragic, and reshape it into an opportunity for growth. Right? No other animals, no other living beings on this planet elephants, dolphins, any mammals, other mammals, no one gets around a fire and start to talk about their past experiences and see how they can do things differently. We do. So agency is really my second. And then the other one is a Japanese term. I was trying to figure out how to express it. The word is KINTSUGI, and it's Japanese art of breaking pottery and putting the pieces back together with gold lacquer. And the spirit of this is something that is new, might be pretty, but it has no value, really. It's when it's broken and put back together that the value and the character starts to appear. And in that art in particular, the fact that it's gold lacquer, it's the glue that put pieces back together, that is even more valuable than the pottery at the beginning. So it's not the pieces of how you were born on this earth or who you are as an individual, but it's the character that is built over time that really gives your value and makes you who you are. In the same way that the tree, the bark is the character of the tree. So resiliency, agency, and KINTSUGI.
I love it. What great words of wisdom for people to take away from this conversation. Daniel, it's been my absolute pleasure to come in as your guest host today, and congratulations on 100 episodes of the Future of Space podcast. And I do hope your audience continues to listen in to get some of these great stories that you're sharing, and really remembering that humanity is the center part of space exploration.
It is. Thank you so much, Alice, for coming. It's been an honor.